Hey guys, so we're back with another tutorial here. This time we're going to be discussing the basics of InDesign and transitioning from Photoshop to InDesign and what to do with the images that we've already created. So most of you should already have the 6 images completed. We'll open up Adobe Bridge here just to look at them. So I've already opened the folder in the F drive. I went to my ComTech folder, and then inside I had my Block 3 folder, and this has my completed 6 images. So image number 1 was our blemish removal, and then image number 2 we removed the light stand out of the corner, if you remember. Image 3 we did this selective color, making the basketball the only thing in color, or some of you did the variation where you had the jersey color that you changed, also using a selective color, layer masks, and hue and saturation layer. And then we moved on to image 4 where we removed the big tree that was in the corner of the photo. And then image 5 we added in this girl with some shadows and some text overlay. And then finally we finished up looking at cropping with image 6 here. So these 6 images now, we're going to place them onto a single page. Now it's much more difficult to do this kind of operation in Photoshop. It's not really Photoshop's job. Photoshop is for editing and manipulating individual photos. Where we want to go when we want to edit or manipulate multiple photos to get them lined up on a page is to InDesign. So I've already opened this up, so it may take a moment for it to load on your computer, but we'll open up Adobe InDesign and we'll get started here right away. Adobe InDesign is a program designed specifically for page layout. You can design entire books, you can design novels and graphic novels and all kinds of different artwork that relates to page layout and text and graphics working together in the same document. So by default, InDesign pops up with this nice new interface, asks you, would you like to start something new? And I say yes, let's try and start something new. So we're just going to click the Start New button. It will bring up this lovely little browser, which looks very similar to our Photoshop startup window. When Photoshop now loads, we have a very similar looking window. The one thing to notice that by default though, instead of being in pixels and in inches, the increment is in picas. That's kind of an international standardized printer's unit. It's very confusing. It's hard to understand what the ratios are. So for us, we're going to switch it to inches. Now, this is amazing. In 2017, this is a totally new feature that they've added in. We never could do this from the original main menu. We had to do it in the preferences and fiddle around trying to find this setting. So this is a super cool new update that they've added into Adobe into the InDesign initial first window startup here. So we're going to select inches, and then by default we're going to just use a regular standard piece of paper. Now it's already gone ahead and put those dimensions in for us, 8.5 by 11, which is a standard piece of paper, and our orientation is going to be in a portrait setting, so a vertical page, if you can imagine that. We only need one page for now. We'll discuss later on when we do our tutorial, our magazine tutorial, what the page numbers and the start page and all that stuff helps us with. For now, we don't really need to worry about our margins too much, but you can pop them open. They're set by default to 1/2 inch. That's a pretty standard margin size. Everything else looks good to go. So we're just going to give this a name though, so that we're not started with just untitled. We're going to call this assignment number 5, and we're going to call this 5A. Assignment 5B is our magazine tutorial, whereas assignment 5A is just taking the 6 images that we created in Photoshop and making one document out of them so that we can print off and hand in just one piece of paper instead of 6 individual documents. So with all these settings ready to go, we're just going to hit create, and InDesign will go ahead now and it will open up a nice new blank document for us to get started working on. This blank document though it may look a little stretched on your screens at times when you're watching this video back, it is at 8.5 by 11. Trust the margins on the page here, the rulers that show up. Don't trust the way it looks on your screen in case it looks a little distorted. With InDesign, there's lots of different ways to bring in pictures, to work with text, to work with graphics. Really simply, we're just going to do a few different things here to show you the very, very basics. We'll get more into what InDesign can do for us later on. But generally, unlike Photoshop where you have the option of using a text box or a text layer and just having text be by itself, in InDesign, text always must be within a placeholder. It must be within a box. So when we take the text tool here, and if we were just to simply click one time, nothing would really happen. It doesn't allow us to type because we haven't defined our text box. So what we need to do is take the text type tool here, and we need to actually drag ourselves out a box that we're going to fill the top portion of the page here. So go from margin to margin, and it gives us a nice box with decent size to get started in here. This page, as I said before, is at 8.5 by 11. So we don't want to have our text box go right to the edge of the page, because when it gets printed, that's going to get cut off. The nice thing with margins, and what's really helpful about margins, is it helps you keep your text safe so that it's not going to get accidentally cut off when you print anything. The next thing we're going to do here is we're going to type some text. So we're going to call this Basic Photoshop. So however you want to type that, and with whatever font you want to type that, you can type Basic Photoshop. We're going to make this a lot bigger. So in InDesign, again, similar to other programs, to change the font size of text, you're going to highlight that text that you want to change the size of, and then you can go in here and you can change it to the predefined sizes, or again, you can make that bigger using the arrow tool. But if you notice, all of a sudden my pieces of my letters start to fall away here, and it starts to hyphenate that word. And what that's telling me is that my text doesn't fit within the text box size that I've chosen to make. So I need to do a couple things. For one, I noticed now that Basic Photoshop, if I want to make it big and bold, it's not going to fit on one line. So I need to add in an enter here, or a carriage return, to give myself a space onto the next line. So I'm actually going to take out this space that's in here. I'm going to delete that, and then I'm going to hit enter, which unfortunately makes the photo disappear completely, but I'll show you some magic. We'll get it back here right away. So the next step would be to make this box a little bit bigger. So now we can see everything. So if you take your selection tool here, it'll automatically select this box, but if it wasn't selected, if it had something else selected, you would simply click on this text box, and now you can make it bigger. You can drag the size of this box down, which will reveal the word Photoshop, the whole word. Now we can, again, we can select the word simply by double clicking inside that box. So our selection tool selects the box. It allows us to move it around on the page. In this case, it's in the right place. And then if we simply just double click, it will automatically select the text tool and allow us to make text adjustments. Well, we want to have this be centered. We want to make it look nice and bold because it's a title. So we're going to select both the word Basic and Photoshop, and we're going to use at the top here, there's the quick alignment tool. So we can just click centered, and it will center that text now on the page. Now I don't really like this Minion Pro kind of basic font. I'm going to find something slightly more creative. Let's see what kind of different styles we want. You can do this kind of check and guess and kind of click down the list of samples, or what you can do is just select at the top here the first font in the box and don't select the drop down, and you can now use the arrow tools. Once you select one of them, you can use the arrow tool up and down to scale through the different fonts and see what they look like. So you can kind of guess and check, if you will, and just kind of quickly select through the fonts to see which style you might like. Let's go with this Broadway font. I think looks like a fun font. Now we want this to only be on two lines. We want to have it be basic and Photoshop, not on Photo-Shop. That's not a very good title. So we need to make this lettering slightly smaller so that it's going to fit within the box that we've created. So all I have to do is click this down arrow and just decrease the size of my text a little bit, and once it clicks over into one line, now I know that this can be set up on the just a two-line nice simple font, or excuse me, nice simple title. Because this font is quite large, the spacing between the lines, which is known as the kerning, is quite high. So we have a lot of space being taken up by the white space between the two lines of text. So a way to combat that is to actually adjust that kerning. We can change this space if we select these words. We use the Alt key. You hold the Alt key on the keyboard and use the up and down arrows. Will actually nudge your text closer together or further apart. So we want to set it at a nice, reasonable spacing so that it looks professional and doesn't have a big kind of awkward space behind it. Now we're going to add one more thing in here. We're going to add our name, but we don't want our name to be giant, so we can leave it in the same font and we'll just hit enter. And for now I'm going to go Mr. Wright, and this is block 3. Well, that's not very effective for me to type in a ginormous font that just falls off the page. So what's more effective is if I change my font settings first. So I'm going to leave it with Broadway, but now I know that I want a much smaller font. So maybe let's say 36 points. The 36-point font is going to now allow me to type my full name, Mr. Wright, if I could spell it correctly. And then we'll go block 3, all in the same line. Now again, I don't want this floating out in the middle of nowhere here. I would like this to be tucked up nice and neat underneath where it says Basic Photoshop. So I'm going to highlight this line of text, just the one line. And again, I'm going to use the Alt key and the up arrow, and I'm going to nudge this closer to the word Photoshop. So now I get a nice professional looking big title, big name. Now it's probably a little bit massive. We've now used 3.5 inches, give or take, of the entire page, but for this assignment we want to learn how to make big header fonts and labels, so why not, right? If you think it's just too big, you're more than welcome to highlight the various different lines of text, make them a little smaller, and nudge them up accordingly so that you get a nice tight document. I think I might make this one maybe only go 24 point so that it's a subtitle here and it's not so ginormous. Okay? Once you have that completed, we now can scale this box just out of our way. We wouldn't have to, we could leave it big, but it tends to get in the way and get accidentally selected, and it just becomes a little bit awkward. So best to shrink that down because we don't need so much extra space. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a series of what are called placeholders. In order to put an image into InDesign, we have to have a place to put that image. We need to have a box. Just like I said, we had to have a box for the text, we have to have a box for the images. So we're going to use this rectangle frame tool here, the one with the X through it. If you look, there's the standard rectangle tool, which would be for drawing rectangles, and underneath that we have different, oh, of course it falls off the page here. We have different options, like we have the rectangle tool, the ellipse tool, and the polygon tool. As well, we have those similar options underneath of this frame tool. The frame tool, however, though, when we select the frame tool, allows us to draw simple frames in our image, and they just sit there and they wait for us to put something inside them. We can define the stroke of them, we can define the background color, we can define a whole bunch of different options about them positionally, but generally they just wait until we've placed an image inside them. But the trick is, how do I make 6 of them that are all the exact same size? Well, the really cool thing is that if I'm just going to go back one step, so Control Z and get rid of this. When I drag out my frame tool here, as I drag it out, I can make one big box that fills this area. So a little bit down from the words of my name and all the way to the bottom. And now if I hit the right arrow key, I can automatically break it into 2 boxes that are identical sizes. And then if I click the up arrow twice, I will now give myself 6 even, perfectly sized boxes that are all the same size and shape. Now the problem with that is I don't want the boxes to be so close together. So I need to hold the Control key on the keyboard. So go Control and then my left or right arrow. If I use my left arrow, it makes the line smaller. If I make my right arrow, makes the gap a bit bigger between each one. And similarly, my down arrow makes the gap smaller. My up arrow increases the size of gap between the boxes. I need to leave myself enough space that I can slide some labels in to these gaps. So make sure that you've left enough space to add in labels in between all the different images. Once I'm finished that, now I would finally let go with my mouse and it creates those 6 placeholders. So I know people have problems with this step. I'm going to do it again because it's nice to see it twice. You'll figure it out hopefully on the second go round. So again, take the frame holder tool here. We need to make sure we leave enough space at the top to get our first label in. So keep in mind that you want to leave just enough space to leave a label at the top. And then we're going to bring it down here. Line it up with our margins. We're going to select the right arrow and the up arrow twice. Gives us 6 boxes that are identical in size. And then all we have to do is hold the Control key and the up arrow to space out our boxes. Now, you may have to actually push the up arrow a few times. Holding it sometimes doesn't actually go any faster. It's just as easy to click it multiple times. So this way now, when I let go with my mouse, I have 6 perfectly sized and spaced boxes that will give me an area to put the pictures in once I'm ready to do so. We're going to finish up all of our text items first. So before we place our images, we're now going to take the text tool again and we're going to make one text box that fits between here and on top of this image. So if you notice, as I'm tracking along here, when I get to the edge of this image, InDesign's got this cool feature saying, hey, did you want this box to be the same size as this one that it's above? And in my case, I do want the box to fit in that same gap. So in this box, obviously this is image 1. So we're going to call this image number 1. And again, like we did before, we're going to use the quick alignment tool here and just kind of center this. And we're going to raise the font size just a bit. And just to keep things consistently, I'm going to select that Broadway font again. Now, the nice thing about InDesign is it shows you your last few fonts that you've used. So in this case, I can quickly go to Broadway, or I could scale up and down and find Broadway in my fonts and select that. Now, what's weird is that this image number 1 is set kind of at the top. Well, again, it has to do with the spacing of the lines in our image. So I don't want it to be so close to the top. I'd like it to be closer to the bottom. So I'm going to hold the Alt key, and I'm actually going to increase my spacing here. So if you notice, you can't use the quick Alt and scale. You can't move it up and down. So we need to go into our character settings. So I have it already open on the side here, but if you don't have it open, you would go to Window, Type and Tables, and then select Character. The quick connect is just Control T. But that's going to bring up all the settings associated with your text here. So not only does it show the font family you've chosen, but it also shows the size, the metrics, it shows your 100% scale, it shows what we're going to change here, which is our baseline. So we can actually move our baseline up and down. It shows the italics. If we wanted to italicize these letters, we could do so. It shows our spacing between the letters. This is also known as your leading. So it's the actual physical space between each character. We're going to set this back to 100%. We have another way to space, which makes each letter spaced more evenly. And then finally, again, our kerning, which is our image up and down between the lines. Well, our line spacing, we only have one space. So we have to change our base point, and we're going to make it come down so that it's much closer to our image. Now, that wasn't so hard to do one of them, but it would be really annoying to do all 6 of them. So I usually like to take my selection tool now, and because I like the way this text box is set up, I can simply go Alt and click and drag from that one to my new location, and it will automatically copy that text box. Now I could also do a Control C and then do Control V and copy and paste them that way as well, but I find that the Alt click is faster because it just makes an automatic copy, and I don't have to let go of the Alt key. I can just sit there and hold it, and I can drag out all my copies from the same one, and they all look identical. They're all placed very similar and in the same place. And now simply all I have to do is double click on them, select the number, and change it to a number 2. And then go to this one, number 3, number 4. Now if you notice, it's selecting a little bit above my letters or my numbers, and that's because I've pushed my baseline way below where the normal selection would be. So if I was to select this, the view is selecting much higher to show you that your normal baseline is much higher than where you actually have forced it to be. So this gives me the option. I'll go here, number 5, and then finally image number 6. Now at this point, if we were to save this as a template or save this document in this format, it would allow us to create multiple different versions of this image with the images 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on it. Right? We could change the title, we could change our name, etc. So at this point, we're going to go File, Save As. And if you notice, it's going to force us to save it as a .indd, which is an InDesign document. You can save it as a template for later use. You can save it as some of the older versions of InDesign. But in our case, we want to just regular save. Now again, go to your F drive, find your ComTech folder, that you should have already created, and then whatever block you are, go into that block's folder. Some of you I know will have made like Photoshop folders or made InDesign folders. Just make sure you know where you're saving this document. And if you notice, because we gave it a name at the beginning, we don't even have to change the name. It's already set up as assignment number 5A. So all we would have to do is hit save, and this document will now save for us in the background safely where we're not going to mess it up. Okay? Now that we have that base template document saved, now we're going to add our images in. And what's nice is InDesign allows us, we could add one image in. So I could select here on this image number 1. If I want the image to pop into the box, I need to have the box selected. If I don't have any boxes selected and I go File, Place, and I select image number 1, it's going to give me this placement gun. So it's going to show me where to place this. I can place it in box number 1, in number 2, in number 3, 4, 5, wherever. Or I could simply click outside of all those boxes, and InDesign is going to paste that picture in the best size that it sees fit. In this case, it's a really small image. So we're going to need to scale that image up to fit the box. It's not going to work very well in the size that it comes in naturally. But if I was to place one of my other images that I know is much larger, notice the difference, right? So it becomes quite clumsy to just place images randomly in InDesign without putting them into an image folder. Okay? The nice thing about InDesign again is that we can place multiple images at the same time. So when we go File, Place, we can select all 6 images, select Open, and now if you notice there's a little green or little blue 6 in brackets beside your image placement thumbnail, and that's telling me that I have 6 images to place. So now I'm going to place image number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, and number 6. Now some of them fit reasonably well. For this blemish removal picture, not so bad, not the worst placement in the world. We want it to fill the box, however, so we're going to need to fit that picture to our frame. Similarly, we're going to need to fit these other pictures to our frame as well, so that they're not so big, because they're much bigger than they need to be. So the easiest way that I know is in this case, because if we tried to select the whole thing, we would select the text layers as well, and we don't want that. We're going to select the images individually. So we select the first image, we hold the Shift key, and we select the second image, the third image, the fourth image, the fifth image, and the sixth image. And now we can do what's called select our fitting. So if we right click on any one of those images that we've selected, we can go to fitting and we can fill the frame proportionately. There's lots of different ways to do this. We can fit the content proportionately. We can fit the frame to the content. We can fit the content to the frame. And we can center the content. So in our case, we want to, actually probably what will work better is to fit the content proportionately. So select Fit Content Proportionately, and if you notice, they will all fit into the boxes. They're not all the same size, they're not all the same shape, because each picture will fit slightly differently. Now, if you notice, before I unselect this, I'm going to show you what would happen if we go to Fit and Fill Frame Proportionately. It now fills it to the width of the frame and doesn't care if the height goes outside of the box. The problem is that if you fit a portrait-sized image to a fill frame proportionately, now it's going to chop off too much of the top and bottom. So it's not going to work very well. So it's better to do the fit as opposed to the fill. That's going to give us our images here all set up nice and neat and tidy. Once you've completed this portion, we're going to save it again. So we're going to go File, Save. It's already been saved before, so now we don't have to do a Save As. We can just do File, Save. And then the final step before we print it is to go File, and we're going to go Export. And what that does is it allows us to export our document as a PDF. Now again, InDesign is smart enough to know where we saved our document before. So it's automatically taken me back to block 3 to that folder. And I'm going to select PDF from the drop-down. Now we want a print PDF, not an internet-based interactive one, or a JPEG or a Flash document. There's lots of different formats we can export as, but in this case we just want a standard Adobe PDF for printing. When we hit save, it's going to give us an option that asks, do we want high quality print? Do we want some other standards? I usually leave this as the default settings. Very few times have I ever had to change any of these settings. The one thing to mention and to note is in this case we only have one page, so it doesn't matter. But when we do our magazine project, we need to make sure that this button for pages is selected. If it's set to spreads, anytime you have a double page side by side, it will combine it into one piece of paper and it prints funny that way. So we want to make sure that it's set to pages. We're going to then export that document, and it's a really small document, so it goes quite quickly on these computers and you won't see any processes happening. But if there was a large document, if you were compiling quite a large document, you might end up having issues. And so if you check in your background tasks, it will show us if there's anything still saving in the background. In this case there's not, so we can go on to the next step. The next step would be printing this document. So we're going to go simply to our regular Windows File Explorer. We're going to open up our search here. I'm going to go to my F drive, to the Comtech folder that I've created, and into the block 3, and I will find assignment 5 as an InDesign and assignment 5 as a PDF. I want to print from the PDF because sometimes the InDesign will not print correctly straight from InDesign to our printer. So in this case we're going to open up the PDF that we created. It's going to open up Adobe Reader. We can have this PDF here. We can double check it, make sure everything looks correct. And then we're simply going to go File, Print. It should open up this print dialog box. We're going to select Lab 152 from the drop down because that's our black and white printer. We don't need to print this document in color. For this assignment, I don't need to see the colors. I just need to see that you've completed it. So we're going to do it in basic black and white. If we wanted to print it in color, you would need to select Lab 152 Color from your settings. We're going to print it to its actual size. You could scale to fit it if you wanted in case it was too big. But we're going to print the actual size because we already know that we've made the proper adjustments for the margins. And then it's simple as hitting print. And that document is going to process for us. And then it will be off to the printer. You can hand that document in once you've finished printing it off to the hand-in box on Mr. Wright's desk. And then we'll be off to the next section, working on InDesign, creating our very own magazine project. So that's it for today for this tutorial. Thank you for watching or participating in my class. Have a good time.